I thought I'd cracked the code to happiness when everything I'd manifested started coming true. What I discovered was that getting exactly what you think you want can be the most terrifying thing that ever happens to you. My name is Sophia, and this is the story of how my dream life became a waking nightmare that I'm still trying to escape. It all started in January 2022 when I was at my absolute lowest point. I was 28, living in a studio apartment in Denver with a leaky ceiling, working a soul-crushing customer service job that barely covered my rent, and recovering from a devastating breakup with my ex-fiancé Marcus, who'd left me for his yoga instructor 2 weeks before our wedding. I was scrolling through Instagram at 2 a.m., watching influencers talk about manifestation and the law of attraction. Normally I would have rolled my eyes, but something about my desperation made me open to trying anything. I watched hours of content about vision boards, scripting, and becoming a vibrational match for your desires. The idea was intoxicating. I could literally think my way into a better life. I threw myself into manifestation with the intensity of someone who had nothing left to lose. I created a vision board covering an entire wall of my apartment, images of a gorgeous Victorian house with a wraparound porch, a successful creative career, a handsome partner with kind eyes, a close-knit group of interesting friends, financial abundance, and perfect health. I developed elaborate daily rituals. Every morning at 5:33 a.m., a number I'd read was highly manifestational. I'd meditate for exactly 17 minutes, journal 3 pages of stream of consciousness thoughts, and spend 20 minutes staring at my vision board while repeating affirmations. I am worthy of abundant love. I attract success effortlessly. My perfect life is manifesting now. I researched every technique, the 369 method, where you write your desires 3 times in the morning, 6 times in the afternoon, and 9 times before bed. I'd script detailed stories of my perfect day as if I was already living it. I practiced living in the end, acting as though my manifestations had already occurred. The first sign that something was working came in March 2022. I'd been affirming, I attract my perfect career opportunity, when my upstairs neighbor, Elena, knocked on my door. She was a freelance graphic designer who said she'd been, randomly, thinking about me and wondered if I'd be interested in helping with client communications for her growing business. Elena was exactly the type of person I'd been trying to manifest into my life: artistic, spiritual, successful, and genuinely kind. She paid me double what I was making at customer service, and the work was actually fulfilling. Within 2 weeks, I'd quit my corporate job and was working full-time with Elena's design agency. But here's where it gets strange. Elena claimed she'd never actually knocked on my door. When I mentioned it a month later, she looked confused and said she'd been in Portland that entire week visiting her sister. She had no memory of offering me the job, just that one day she'd felt guided to hire me, like the idea had appeared fully formed in her mind. The manifestations accelerated after that. In April, I was walking through the historic Highlands neighborhood, daydreaming about living in one of the beautiful old houses, when a "for sale" sign appeared in front of a Victorian that was identical to the one on my vision board. Not similar, identical. Same yellow paint, same wraparound porch, same ornate gingerbread trim. The real estate agent, Jennifer, called me that same afternoon. She claimed I'd submitted an inquiry about the house online, but I had never contacted her. My credit score had somehow improved by 150 points overnight, an impossibility given how credit reporting actually works. The seller accepted an offer that was $40,000 below asking price, and I qualified for a mortgage despite having minimal savings. "It's like this house was meant for you," Jennifer said during closing. The seller said they had a dream about a young woman with dark hair who would complete the house's story. When they saw you, they knew you were the one. I moved in during May, and that's when I met David. David was perfect in ways that felt almost algorithmic. He was 32, a veterinarian with his own practice, devastatingly handsome with warm brown eyes, and shared every interest I'd written in my manifestation journal. He loved hiking, cooking, independent films, and had a rescue dog named Hemingway, exactly like the partner I'd scripted in my daily affirmations. We met at the farmer's market, a location I'd specifically visualized, when Hemingway broke free from David's leash and ran straight to me, jumping into my arms like he'd known me his entire life. David apologized profusely, but there was immediate chemistry that felt electric and destined. Our first conversation lasted 4 hours. He'd grown up in the same small Iowa town as my grandmother, a place I'd never mentioned to anyone in Denver. He'd majored in English literature with a focus on the same 19th century authors I loved. He'd been saving money to travel to Iceland and the Scottish Highlands, 2 places at the top of my travel wish list that I'd never shared with anyone. "This is going to sound crazy," David said during our 3rd date, "but I feel like I've been waiting my whole life for you. Like everything I've done has been leading to this moment." By August, we were living together in the Victorian house. David had effortlessly integrated into my life, bringing furniture that matched my aesthetic perfectly, cooking meals that were exactly what I craved before I even mentioned being hungry, and anticipating my needs in ways that felt magical. My social circle expanded with people who seemed to materialize from nowhere. Luna, a yoga instructor and life coach who lived 3 blocks away and had somehow never crossed my path until I moved to the neighborhood. Marcus, not my ex, but confusingly sharing the same name, a photographer who offered to take professional headshots for my growing design portfolio. Jade, a writer working on her first novel who became my closest female friend. Every person who entered my life was exactly what I thought I needed. Luna introduced me to spiritual practices that deepened my manifestation abilities. Marcus's photography launched my personal brand on Instagram, where I gained 50,000 followers in 3 months. Jade and I would spend hours in coffee shops discussing philosophy and creativity, conversations that felt profound and life-changing. Alina's business exploded, and she made me a full partner by October. Money flowed effortlessly: client referrals, unexpected bonuses, freelance opportunities that fell into my lap without me seeking them. My bank account grew from $347 to over $180,000 in 8 months. From the outside, my life looked like a manifestation success story. I posted about my journey on social media, and other aspiring manifestors looked to me as proof that the law of attraction really worked. I received messages from women around the world asking for my secrets and thanking me for inspiring their own spiritual journeys. But by November 2022, subtle cracks began appearing in my perfect reality. David's attentiveness started feeling suffocating rather than romantic. He would know I'd had a stressful day before I came home, have my exact comfort food ready, and suggest activities that were precisely what I needed to relax. But I'd never told him about my day. My food preferences were constantly changing, and his suggestions were too perfectly timed to feel natural. I tested this by deliberately thinking about wanting Thai food while at work, not mentioning it to anyone. When I arrived home, David had ordered Thai food from my favorite restaurant, a place I'd never told him about. When I asked why he'd chosen Thai, he looked confused and said he'd just had a craving. Luna's spiritual guidance became increasingly invasive. She'd show up at my house unannounced, claiming she'd received intuitive messages that I needed her support. Her advice was always exactly what I needed to hear, but delivered with an intensity that felt rehearsed rather than spontaneous. During one of our sessions, Luna guided me through a meditation where she claimed to see my Akashic records. She described events from my childhood that I'd never shared with anyone: specific conversations with my deceased grandmother, a traumatic incident from 3rd grade, the exact details of dreams I'd had as a teenager. "How do you know that?" I asked, genuinely unsettled. "The universe reveals everything to those who are open to receiving," she replied, but her eyes looked vacant, like she was reading from an invisible script. My friendship with Jade began feeling artificial. Our conversations, which had initially felt deep and meaningful, started following predictable patterns. She would ask questions that prompted me to share specific stories or emotions, then respond with insights that were perfectly calibrated to my psychological needs. I started noticing that Jade's personality shifted depending on what I needed. When I was feeling creative, she was intensely artistic. When I was questioning my spiritual practices, she became deeply philosophical. When I was happy, she was effervescent. But I never saw her have needs, struggles, or off days of her own. The most disturbing realization came when I found Jade's journal, which she'd left at my house after one of our coffee sessions. Instead of personal thoughts and experiences, it contained detailed notes about me. S responds well to validation about her intuition. Mention synchronicities to reinforce spiritual beliefs. Avoid discussing family trauma creates resistance to guidance. That's when I understood that my perfect life wasn't perfect, it was performed. The house began feeling like a set designed specifically for my comfort but lacking authentic history. I'd never seen neighbors, never received mail for previous owners, never found forgotten objects from the home's past. It was as if the Victorian had materialized exactly when I needed it, complete but empty of genuine life. David's veterinary practice didn't seem to have actual patients. I'd visit him at work, but the office was always mysteriously, between appointments. His staff were friendly but answered questions about the practice with vague responses. His diploma was perfectly framed on the wall, but when I looked closer, the university name was slightly blurred, like a photo that hadn't quite rendered properly. Alina's design clients were equally mysterious. I'd handle communications for major projects, but never met clients in person. Their emails were always perfectly professional but somehow generic, like they were generated rather than written by real people with distinct personalities and needs. The financial abundance that had felt like such a blessing started revealing its artificial nature. Money appeared in my accounts, but when I tried to trace the sources, the explanations became convoluted and inconsistent. Client payments that Elena claimed came from specific companies couldn't be verified. Bonuses appeared without corresponding work contracts. By January 2023, I was living in a beautiful prison created by my own desires. Every aspect of my manifested life was designed to make me happy, but the happiness felt hollow because I was increasingly aware that nothing around me was authentic. The people in my life weren't independent individuals with their own goals and struggles, they were characters playing roles in a story I'd unconsciously authored. Their personalities, needs, and even memories seemed to shift based on what would serve my emotional and spiritual development. David never challenged me, never had bad days, never needed support for his own problems. Our relationship was frictionless because he wasn't a complete person, he was my idealized partner brought to life without the complexity that makes real relationships meaningful. Luna and Jade weren't true friends because friendship requires mutual support and authentic sharing. They existed to guide me, validate me, and facilitate my spiritual growth, but I realized I knew nothing substantial about their inner lives beyond how they related to my journey. The house wasn't a home because it had no history independent of my vision. The career success wasn't fulfilling because the work didn't serve real people with genuine needs. The financial abundance wasn't secure because it wasn't connected to value I was actually creating in the world. I was living inside a sophisticated simulation designed by my own subconscious mind, a reality that prioritized my comfort over authenticity, my desires over truth. The breaking point came in February 2023 when I decided to test the limits of my manifested reality. I announced to David that I wanted to visit his hometown, meet his family, and see where he grew up. His response was the first time I'd seen genuine panic in his eyes. "They're traveling right now," he said, stumbling over words for the first time since I'd known him. "Maybe later in the year." I pressed harder, asking specific questions about his parents, his childhood home, his high school friends. David's answers became increasingly vague and contradictory. When I suggested we could drive to his hometown just to see the area, he became physically ill and had to leave the room. That night, I secretly searched for any record of David online. No social media profiles, no professional listings beyond his practice website, no college records, no trace of his existence before he'd appeared in my life. It was as if David had materialized as a fully formed 32-year-old with no past. I confronted Luna about the inconsistencies in her spiritual guidance and her uncanny knowledge of my personal history. She became defensive and accused me of resisting my highest good and sabotaging my own manifestations through doubt. But when I pushed further, asking for specific details about her own life and spiritual training, Luna's composure cracked. She began speaking in circles, her advice became generic rather than specifically tailored to my situation, and eventually she simply stopped responding to my calls and texts. The most terrifying realization was that I didn't know how to escape a reality I'd created through my own intense desire and belief. The law of attraction teachings had warned about resistance and limiting beliefs that could sabotage manifestations, but they'd never addressed what to do when your manifestations became a prison. I tried manifesting freedom from the situation, but the universe seemed committed to maintaining the illusion I'd requested. I tried moving out of the Victorian house, but every apartment I looked at had deal-breaking flaws or fell through at the last minute. I tried ending my relationship with David, but he'd become emotionally dependent in ways that made leaving feel cruel and impossible. The most disturbing aspect was that everyone around me insisted I had the perfect life and should be grateful for my blessings. When I tried to explain my concerns to my sister back in Iowa, she accused me of manifesting problems where none existed, and suggested I was having a quarter-life crisis triggered by too much success too quickly. My attempts to reconnect with old friends from my pre-manifestation life were met with confusion and resistance. They'd moved on, formed new relationships, and seemed to remember me differently than I remembered myself. It was as if my intense focus on creating a new reality had somehow edited my past connections out of existence. The process of breaking free required systematically dismantling everything I'd manifested, even the aspects that had genuinely improved my life. I had to end relationships with people I'd grown to love, even knowing they weren't entirely real. I had to walk away from financial abundance and career success that had been the answer to years of struggle. Breaking up with David was the hardest part because his love for me was real within the context of what he was, a perfect partner created by my subconscious desires. When I explained that I needed to leave, he didn't argue or try to change my mind. He simply faded from my life as quietly as he'd entered it, taking Hemingway and leaving no trace that he'd ever existed. Luna, Jade, and Marcus disappeared similarly. Alina's business dissolved overnight, clients canceled contracts simultaneously, and she moved out of state within a week, claiming she'd received an unexpected family inheritance that required her immediate attention. The Victorian house sold within days to a cash buyer who never toured the property. My bank accounts slowly drained as the mysterious income sources dried up and previous deposits were somehow reversed or recalled. By June 2023, I was back to living in a small apartment, working a regular job, and rebuilding my life from scratch. But this time, I was committed to authenticity over perfection, to accepting the messiness and uncertainty of real life rather than trying to control my reality through spiritual practices. The experience taught me that manifestation, when taken to extremes, can become a form of psychological imprisonment. When we become obsessed with creating our perfect life, we risk losing touch with the authentic connections, genuine challenges, and unpredictable beauty that make life meaningful. I still believe in the power of positive thinking, goal setting, and visualizing success. But I've learned to hold those practices lightly, allowing room for surprise, difficulty, and growth that can't be scripted or manifested. My current life isn't perfect. I struggle financially sometimes, deal with difficult people, and face challenges that my manifested reality would have smoothed away. But it's real, and that reality includes genuine connections with people who have their own needs and problems, work that serves actual clients with real struggles, and a home with history and character that existed long before I moved in. The most valuable lesson from my manifested nightmare is that perfection isn't a goal worth pursuing. The flaws, friction, and unpredictability of authentic life are what create opportunities for genuine growth, real relationships, and meaningful experiences. What would you do if you got everything you thought you wanted, only to discover it was all an illusion? Would you be willing to give up a perfect but artificial life for a messy but real one? Because sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is stop trying to control your reality and start accepting what actually is.